वो मेन प्रॉब्लम रहता है क्योंकि एसिम्टोमेटिक रहता है. मेनी टाइम्स पीपल डोंट रिकॉग्नाइज, मिस हो जाता है, इवन डॉक्टर्स डोंट रिकॉग्नाइज. सो ये इसमें एक मेजर लैक्यूना है. तो both thalassemia minor, if they get married, there is 25% probability, as I explained, that the child can get thalassemia major. So once the child is thalassemia major, he or she might be dependent on blood transfusion throughout his or her lifetime. So that becomes a very or he or she might have to undergo a bone marrow transplant procedure, which is quite challenging procedure, which is quite costly. So all these things, and which needs good healthy matched donor.
Yeah, so there is also a need for bone marrow registry also.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Does our country have that bone marrow registry? Because
our country has 2 bone marrow registries.
Because the bone marrow transplant program, I think when it started in 1970s, from then on, what is the status? What is your perspective? Because there is a shortage of BMT centers.
Yes, absolutely.
How many BMT centers would be there?
Yes, so that's a very good question you are bringing it. So in India there is definitely a shortage of BMT centers. I will give you the exact figures.
It is very well orchestrated kind of job wherein you need anesthetist.
Extremely, no, you don't need an anesthetist basically. You need a totally dedicated transplant center.
Board, you need a board kind of
thing.
Yes,
so we have started bone marrow transplantation center here at Wockhardt Hospital, Mira.
Okay, when?
So we have started it 6 months back. So we have already started doing bone marrow transplantation, and we have taken international patients also are being
medical tourism.
Yes. Okay. So this thing. So bone marrow transplantation center we have started over here.
Okay.
As you are correctly telling, it's a very specialized thing. So it requires totally a dedicated hemato-oncologist, total transplant team, trained onco nurses, blood product support. It is a entire. Basically the patient needs to be in a positive pressure room for approximately 2 to 3 weeks, because these patients are extremely susceptible to all sorts of infections.
Exactly.
So we have to keep them in a something called a HEPA filtered room with laminar flow. So the entire setup is just like OT.
And I think it costs around ₹1 crore to set up a...
No, yes, to set up exactly. To set up a dedicated bone marrow transplant center, it costs nearly ₹1 crore. Autologous bone marrow transplantation, in which you give the patient's own stem cells, costs somewhere around 7 to 8 lakh rupees, somewhere around that. Allogenic bone marrow transplantation, in which we give the patient bone marrow of somebody else. If the donor is a matched sibling,
okay,
so then it costs somewhere around 15 to 16 lakhs.
Allogenic?
Yes. If it is matched unrelated donor, so where there comes a question of your registry.
Okay.
Bone marrow
matched unrelated
registry, which we are talking about. So there we need, in India the bone marrow transplant registry is very less well developed compared to developing countries.
Yeah, even in platelet also is upcoming in Tata Memorial, platelet donor registry. That is also underway.
Yes. So Western countries, the bone marrow transplant registry is very much well developed. So there is practically most of the people who need transplant, 70 to 80% of those people get a donor. In India, it is very less developed. So it is just an upcoming thing. People need to be made aware of the need for bone marrow transplantation, and the awareness needs to be there to them for people to register themselves as donor.
Okay. So do we have the required number of specialists, like the bone marrow transplant specialist would be?
Yes.
I just wanted a certain figure as to how many BMT centers are there, how many will be required, and how many BMT specialists are there.
Exactly.
What is the kind of ratio?
Yes.
Gap?
So
Mumbai or India? India and Mumbai. Mumbai ka bhi bata dein.
Yes. A good way to understand that would be I have the figures right now. I can just quote the figures also. A good way to understand that will be how many transplants are required in India and how many we are actually doing. Okay, so that will give an answer to all.
Were required. There was a waiting list at CMC Vellore.
CMC Vellore, Tata, everywhere there is a huge
waiting list.
Yes, so in developing
huge waiting list.
Huge waiting list. So in developing countries, basically, for 10 million population. Okay, generally around 300 to 400 bone marrow transplants are done. Okay.
For a
population of 10 million. So India has a population of approximately 1.2 crores, which is basically 1200 million.
12.
So we should be doing 36,000 bone marrow transplants in a year.
Okay,
we should be doing 36,000 bone marrow transplants in a year. What we are doing is basically across all the centers together in India, we are doing approximately 600 to 700 bone marrow transplants.
Okay, so we should be doing how many?
36,000.
36,000, and we are doing only 1200.
We are doing only anywhere between 600 to 700.
700, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the huge gap which we're having.
Because I had
pointed out.
Our government knows this challenge.
Yes. So the problem here is multifold.
Yeah.
Okay, we cannot just blame the government. The problem here is multifold. Number one is resources.
Resources in terms of blood banks.
In terms of
blood banks.
First is monetary.
Monetary. Okay.
First is monetary resources. As I was telling you, autologous bone marrow transplant anywhere between 7 to 9 lakhs. Okay. Allogenic bone marrow transplant anywhere between 16 lakhs around. For matched sibling, matched unrelated, the cost goes to anywhere between 40 to 50 lakhs. Okay. So developing country or it is a huge challenge for us to arrange for such financial resources for patients. And again, like many of these diseases have, even after bone marrow transplantation, some of the diseases don't get cured. Okay. So,
do we have this clinical trials also being done in terms of BMTs?
Yes, absolutely. So there are many clinical trials in the field of BMT also.
Okay, they are going on in the country, or
for India, I cannot give you the exact figure. India, as such, the number of clinical trials are quite low compared to the Western countries. For example,
because of a setback, the SC.
Yes. So in United States, I was 3 months back. I was there in United States. I had gone specially for this bone marrow transplant training.
Okay.
And I had gone to the center where bone marrow transplantation was discovered.
Achha.
So that's Fred
Which
Hutch.
center is it?
So that's Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center.
Okay.
In Seattle. So Professor Sir Donald Thomas, he is a Nobel laureate. So he has received Nobel Prize in Medicine for discovery of bone marrow transplantation.
Okay.
And he had discovered it in that very center. So I had gone for training in that center.
Achha, very good.
So
an honor for us.
Yes. So I had gone for training in that center, and that's a state-of-the-art center. So there, if you see, most of the patients are enrolled in clinical trials.
Okay.
So.
But in India, that kind of thing has not picked up in India.
Yes, so India that kind of thing has not picked up because somehow people have got a negative impression about clinical trial. If you tell somebody that we are going to enroll you in a clinical trial, they see it in a negative way. Media also often projects it in a very negative way that doctor is doing experiment on patients.
Because there were issues raised during the ICR, Indian Society of Clinical Research.
Yes.
I've been meeting these people. So basically, the kind of protocols also, the India-specific protocols are not there. And there are now, even the health ministry, the secretary met me recently, health secretary. So he told me that they will be coming out with a whole new set of guidelines on clinical trials. New draft rules on clinical trials will come.
So the procedure,
2 minutes.
Yeah, the procedure of clinical trials basically needs to be made a bit simpler.
Okay.
So that doctors are encouraged to enroll patients in clinical trials. Because ultimately, if you see all the guidelines, the best way of treatment of all these difficult diseases, blood cancer, bone marrow transplantation in all these difficult diseases, certain types of newer therapies like cellular therapies, CAR T-cell therapy, all these kind of therapies are coming out, so which are not medicines, but in which we take out the patient's blood cells, modulate these blood cells, and then inject it back to the patients. So certain type, all these therapies are coming out. So these are all such kind of therapies have to be enrolled in clinical trials. So the procedure of clinical trials has to be made a lot more simpler so that doctors also are encouraged in enrolling patients in
because then there were certain caps on certain investigator-led studies and all that. Yes. Sir, one thing, there are 2 or 3 major programs which the government has come out with. One is the pharmacovigilance program and another is the hemovigilance program. So does this hemovigilance program give any kind of accounting or will it help in some way medical specialists, the oncologists or hematologists, in kind of driving the BMT ahead? Like we have a hemovigilance program of India, wherein I think 400 hospitals or blood banks have registered. There are 2,760 blood banks.
Yes.
So does it in any way relate to what BMT is?
Yes. So
how it can help?
Basically, as you were correctly pointing out before, so BMT, one of the major drawbacks, as I was telling you, is financial drawback.
Correct.
Second issue is lack of donors.
Correct.
So for lack of donors, the need of the hour is to develop bone marrow registries in a big way. So all the centers which are treating blood cancer patients or even otherwise, all the so like you told that all these blood banks, so all these centers should be basically motivated to raise awareness about bone marrow transplantation. So otherwise the donor has very minimal health related issues. There is practically not much risk to the donor in that sense. So people should be encouraged to be a bone marrow donor just like other organs. So the need of the hour is to develop the bone marrow registry in a big way, so that at least all those who are who need the bone marrow transplantation, and at least those patients who are affordable or who can arrange for resources from multiple ways, government funded or other things, can at least nobody dies because of lack of a donor. Because if we are shipping, many of the times what happens is we have to ship the bone marrow stem cells from abroad.
Achha.
So that itself incurs a huge additional cost of approximately say 20 lakhs or so.
Achha.
So the cost of shipping the stem cells is almost equal to the cost of transplantation procedure per se. So those things can be minimized in a lot of ways.
So stem cells are primarily, bone marrow is the richest source of stem cells.
Yes, so these are
even the cord blood, even the cord blood.
Yes, so these are what I am talking about is hematopoietic stem cells. So of which basically we take, we give the patient patient or donor growth factor, we collect the stem cells in the blood, and from there we harvest the stem cell. So cord blood stem cell, although it has got, yes, so it has got number of other kind of challenges related to basically after transplantation of cord blood, the engraftment or the recovery of the patient takes a much longer time.
Much longer.
So that's why cord blood transplantation is a bit more challenging and is slightly more difficult than peripheral blood or bone marrow stem cell transplantation.
Okay. Sir, this infection, last question is that infection and in cases have come, there have been cases wherein in the name of voluntary blood donation, people are collecting blood, but they are not tested through good technologies like NAT. Still, ELISA test is being followed. So, and there have been reports about the blood being thrown away because blood has a shelf life.
Yes.
And because most of the time it has been found that blood has been infected. There has been HIV infections and all that. So what do you have to say on that? What can be done to kind of counter this situation?
Yes, so as you told that NAT testing is the ideal thing to do.
Yeah, and even health minister had also announced that they are going to launch the NAT tested blood in Maharashtra first.
Yes.
The Maharashtra
so
health minister.
obviously NAT testing is an ideal thing to do. So I would like to tell you that I have done a project when I was doing my super specialization in hematology. So I have done a project to see in thalassemia patients the impact of NAT tested blood in thalassemia patients, and it was presented in national conference.
Okay.
So if you want, I can just share the details with you.
Okay. And sir, I have a request. If we can get a certain idea about your BMT center here.
Yes.
We probably we want to have a summary.
Yes,
of
yes.
what the BMT center, when it started, how much people has it been able to cater or going to cater?
Yes, so I would request you to then come in the morning time because you have to meet.
You can mail me or
I can mail you.
Yeah,
I can mail you. So
my email address is there. I can just message you.
Should I put it off?
No, just sir कुछ बोल रहे हैं last.
So just last I would like to share with you the NAT tested thing which you are asking.
Okay.
So just 1 minute. So basically I had published it in Hematocon 2014.
Okay.
So So as you are talking, the normal prevalence rate of HIV in general population is 0.29%, of hepatitis B is 2 to 8%, and hepatitis C is approximately 2%.
Okay.
In normal general population, this is the prevalence.
Okay.
Okay. So that means what you are talking, that almost 2% of the voluntary blood donors could be having any of these transfusion transmittable infections.
And that is what the hemovigilance program was all about.
Yes. So in our study, we had tested 5,003 donors.
Acha.
5,000
in India.
In India, in Calcutta Medical College, this study was done.
Okay.
So we had tested 5,003 donors by both NAT and third generation ELISA.
Okay.
Okay. So of which 11 patients were found to be positive by NAT, but not by ELISA.
Acha. Positive by NAT. Okay.
Yes, so 11 patients in 5003 donors were found positive by NAT but not by RI. So we had simultaneously done both the tests.
Both the tests.
Okay. So